これがゴジラの最後の戦いになるかもしれない。
Endings are a facet of storytelling that are deceptively complicated. On paper, it all seems so simple. You think about where everything should logically end up, and that's where you stop. Yet, as any good writer will tell you, writing isn't always about the logical solutions to things. It's about emotions, catharsis, and thematics. You can't just always make everything a happily ever after where everyone gets what they want. It gets ever more complicated the longer your story gets. How do you properly end a story that has had years, maybe even decades of added characters, elements, themes, and so on? Take all of those challenges and apply them to a franchise like Godzilla. A franchise that has surpassed cultural boundaries and has essentially become a global icon of culture. That's the predicament Toho was in the mid-90s. Godzilla had been one of their major franchises since the 50s. At that point, the series had been ongoing for so long that it had entered a different era entirely. Transitioning from its first era, the Showa era, and into its next one in the 80s and 90s, they had been running for almost half a century, and they did legitimately plan to end the series. Well, more so put the franchise on break in Japan for a while, but still, it's a complicated position to be in. And yet, spoilers if you somehow haven't read the title of the video or seen the thumbnail, they answer this question perfectly with their 1995 film, Godzilla vs. Destroyah. Let's talk about it. Before getting into the nitty-gritty details on the film's production, I think I should give a brief overview on the Heisei era of Godzilla movies, just in case people watching this aren't super informed. That way, everyone can have a similar level of context on what we'll be going over. Like many long-running Japanese franchises, or really any long franchise, you could split it into different eras. Now, they are all named after the era of Japan they're made in, excluding the Millennium era. In order, we have the Showa era, which went from 1954 to 1975, the Heisei era, which went from 1984 to 1995, the Millennium era, which went from 1999 to 2004, and the Reiwa era, which started in 2016 and is still ongoing at the time of this video. For now, I'll primarily focus on the Heisei era. This is the second era in the Goji timeline, and it's well beloved by Godzilla fans. It takes elements from the Showa era, but also does its own thing, combining together the goofy, silly fun of the later Showa era films and the mature themes and ideas of the earlier Showa era films. Yet, one major feature of the Heisei era is that it sets up an interconnected universe with a long-form narrative. Eat shit, MCU, Goji did it first! Nah, I'm just kidding. I can't be truly mad at something that gave me the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy and Iron Man 1 and 2. I should do a video on those at some point. Anyways, here's where we get to the film in question, Godzilla vs. Destroyah, which was meant to be the temporary end of the Godzilla franchise, as well as the end of the Heisei Goji films. The original plan for this movie was to basically kill off Godzilla and pass it on to US studios to make films for a while before Japanese Goji would return for the 50th anniversary, which went poorly in hindsight. But Toho really marketed this as the passing of Godzilla, even paving over the famous pool set they shoot in. They also put massive billboards that read "Godzilla dies" in kanji all over Japan. They were really selling this hard that this was the end for Godzilla. So who do you bring on to do such a task? I'm glad you asked the screen in front of your face that, because Toho had the answer. A lot of tenured crew on the previous Heisei era Godzilla movies came back. Takao Okawara came back as director, who previously worked on Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, Godzilla and Mothra, The Battle for Earth, and many other productions. Kazuki Omori came back as writer, and he's done a lot of big work for Godzilla, working on Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla vs. Biollante, which is one of the best Godzilla movies by the way, and he also directed parts of Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. Akira Ufukube came back as composer, and the best way to describe him is that he is the John Williams of Japanese film. He's responsible for so many iconic film scores. He composed the original Godzilla film and many others after that, The Tale of Zatoichi and many of the other films in that series, Yojimbo, there's literally too many to list here. Also, if you haven't seen Yojimbo or Zatoichi, you totally should, they're great movies. An early idea for the movie was for the current Godzilla to fight the Godzilla from the original 1954 film, literally fighting a ghost. I know Godzilla movies can go off the rails a bit, but I'm glad they didn't take this route because it's a little too cheesy and maybe a little too literal. Luckily, Okawara shifted the idea of Goji's new enemy to be based on the weapon that killed him in the first movie, the Oxygen Destroyer. We'll touch back on that later. The special effects they made for this movie were pretty creative, and maybe a little dangerous. When they made the burning Godzilla suit, they placed 200 orange, yellow, and red light bulbs, and placed them into a modified Godzilla suit, and then cover them with semi-transparent plates made of vinyl. It's a pretty clever way to use all those materials and make a phenomenal glowing effect. They also added a mechanic into the suit to push steam out of the suit, thus adding for this meltdown effect they were going for. Kenpachiro Satsuma, the suit actor for Godzilla in this movie and many others, actually passed out inside the suit a few times. This is because the steam was actually carbon monoxide. In fact, he literally had to wear an oxygen mask inside the suit just to make sure he was safe. I hope he didn't retain any permanent damage from that because that sounds genuinely terrible. I know being a suit actor could be a dangerous profession, but geez, never say these actors don't give their life to their craft. Though, to note here, this was Satsuma's final performance after decades of making himself a major actor in this role, much like his forebearer, Haruo Nakajima. And that's all I gotta say about the making of the movie itself. But if you want a super in-depth video on this movie, and really Godzilla and kaiju films in general, check out Big Action Bill's channel. His videos are super detailed and they're really good. Now, let's get on with the movie itself. A great place to start talking about any movie is the characters. It's odd to speak about kaijus as characters in these movies because they're not characters in the traditional sense, but they're all great here. Godzilla's going through an internal crisis that makes you question Godzilla's power and really his existence. Godzilla Jr. is an incredibly sympathetic character. I mean, his dad is literally dying in front of him and he's just trying to find him after he disappears. Destroyah is genuinely one of my favorite kaijus in all of fiction. He's just so cool, and the idea that he's made from the oxygen destroyer from the original Godzilla is an incredible way to make this a full circle moment. I also just love the idea behind him, literally starting out as a microscopic being and growing all the way into a creature that towers over Goji. Miki Segasa is the major returning human character for this movie. Well, she returns for almost all the Heisei era movies anyway. Of course, she isn't really bland at all like a lot of characters in kaiju films can sometimes be. In fact, I think she does a lot here in adding to the movie. She's a strong advocate for Goji even when he's melting down because he's a living being just like the rest of us. She argues heavily with the G-Force. No, not that G-Force, the cool one. There you go. Anyways, it's interesting how she is one of the few against recreating the oxygen destroyer, which in my opinion adds heavily to the nuclear destruction themes of the movie and really to the themes of the Godzilla series in general. I'll also add here that this isn't lost on me how eerily similar it is to how people argued for using the atom bomb on Japan. The whole argument of, we need strong retaliation against a big threat. I think we obviously know how much the US took it way too far when doing that, and how it did eventually kickstart the Cold War. Obviously, the fact Destroyah is created out of this flagrant disregard for their consequences, and is likely a commentary on this, is not lost on me. There's also characters who return from the original 1954 Godzilla movie, or are descendants of characters from that first film, which I think is a great touch because it taps into the ideas of the trauma and pain created in that first Godzilla attack so long ago. Kenichi Yamafune is a character who is the son of the character Shinkichi Yamane, a character who was a child in the first film and lost his parents in the attack. It's interesting to me that Kenichi tracks Godzilla as a hobby or a special interest, yet he's also one of the major proponents of recreating the oxygen destroyer. Maybe there's a lot of generational trauma there that Kenichi hasn't dealt with, and maybe that's also why he has such an interest in Godzilla. Emiko Yamane returns from the first movie, and is still haunted by what happened all those years ago. Her addition is really good because, unlike Miki, she has a more negative history with Goji, yet she still acts as a voice of reason. I also love the question she asks in this movie. If they're gonna recreate the oxygen destroyer, are they sure it'll be used properly? Though characters are nothing without a plot to exist in. Honestly, sometimes kaiju films can be a bit lopsided with their plot, but this story is very tight, razor thin even. We get a lot of time with the human characters, but it's not so hyper-focused on them in the science mumbo-jumbo that it becomes obnoxious. There's this terrifying sense of annihilation throughout the story, mainly because Godzilla is threatening to melt down and explode, which could annihilate the human race, which brings in those themes of nuclear destruction that hadn't been fully tapped on since the original. Though Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One have also done really well with this theme, but they were made after this movie. Watching the Destroyah experiment slowly evolving and growing into more and more monsters, plus the whole section where the task force is sent out to take care of the Destroyahs is phenomenal. It's very inspired by Aliens, but it's done so expertly. The whole segment from the task force being ripped apart by the creatures to getting outside and trapping a reporter in a car was just great. But this is also a great way to build up your plot because it adds another layer of tension throughout the film, introducing a new growing threat that humanity can't stop the growth of, and in many ways are responsible for. Maybe it's the monster cinema or battle shonen nerd in me, but I always appreciate a threat that continuously grows throughout the plot. It isn't always necessary, but there's just something satisfying about watching the opposing forces in a story grow alongside the main one. Yet, there is obviously a deeper reason for why this movie works too. Outside of the characters and the plot structure, this movie works because it creates a complete circle, the ultimate endpoint for Godzilla. It addresses Godzilla history more in the emotional and philosophical way, instead of just being an overstuffed kaiju bash. Instead, it forces Goji to face a kaiju that is his mirror, something made by humans due to them pushing science too far. His history is now facing him. It's like an older, more destructive, evil version of himself is now facing him at his most desperate. In a sense, you could say he's fighting a ghost of his past? It's not literal, but if you notice it in the story, you can tell it's going for that. And of course, Goji has to die. He's reached the end of his life, and yet, in those final moments, his son takes in all his energy and becomes fully grown. Now a new Godzilla is here to continue his never-ending legacy. This movie is a reflection point of sorts, looking back at a long-made history, but also to the future. They comment on the force of destruction Godzilla is, but also the protector role he's also taken too. Godzilla's complicated legacy is taken in throughout this film, while also being a fun kaiju movie. And really, there's no other way Godzilla could end. You could make an overstuffed movie where Godzilla fights 100 other kaijus, and while that'd be fun in the moment, it wouldn't make for the right ending. It wouldn't acknowledge Godzilla's history in Japan and the many things he's come to represent. That's what Godzilla vs. Destroyah does. It makes us, the viewer, acknowledge everything about this series' legacy. It makes us realize how much Godzilla matters to the world, and how much we love him, or hate him, and that's what makes Godzilla vs. Destroyah a perfect ending. And that's all I really gotta say about this one. Did you like the video? Did you not? Well, hey, if you did, like, comment, share, you know, all that stuff. Seriously, it does really help. I'm not gonna beg, but if you do, I'd appreciate it. I've got other couple projects that I've been working on, and trust me, there's a very long video coming. Not about Goji, but about other things I'm passionate about. Hopefully you do enjoy the smaller videos I make in the meantime. But with all that being said, see you next time.